For centuries, the Bible has been seen as a sacred text, historical, spiritual, and divine. But beneath the layers of scripture and tradition, there exists another dimension to these stories, one that speaks not only to our faith, but to our psychology. Not just to our history, but to the architecture of our consciousness. The Bible is more than a religious book. It is a symbolic map, a blueprint of the human mind evolving toward its highest potential. Every character, every event, every landscape in the Bible represents more than people and places. They represent states of being, levels of awareness, and emotional milestones that we all encounter on our journey inward. These stories are metaphors, archetypes embedded deep in our subconscious mind. They are symbolic narratives that reflect the same neurological, emotional, and spiritual transformations we go through when we begin to awaken to our true nature. Take, for example, the story of creation in Genesis. It is not just about the formation of the universe. It's a story of order emerging from chaos. It mirrors how thought, the intention, gives rise to reality. When the Creator says, "Let there be light," it's not just the start of the cosmos. It's the moment of conscious awareness breaking through the unconscious void. That's the moment we move from survival mode to creative mode. That's the moment we shift from matter to mind, from reaction to intention. Adam and Eve in the garden represent the pure, unconditioned self, the innocent observer, but the moment they eat from the tree of knowledge, they become aware of duality. Good and evil, right and wrong, self and other. This isn't just a tale about temptation. It's a neurological leap into self-awareness. The moment we become conscious of ourselves, we also become conscious of our limitation, of our fears, of our separation from the whole. This is the awakening of the neocortex, the thinking brain, and with it comes the responsibility to choose our thoughts, emotions, and actions. When they are cast out of Eden, it's not punishment, it's transformation. It's a descent into the human condition, into survival, into struggle, and yet, even in this so-called fall, there is purpose, because without that fall into unconsciousness, we would never know the thrill of rising. Without forgetting who we are, we would never experience the ecstasy of remembering. The story of Cain and Abel isn't just about sibling rivalry. It's the internal conflict between the part of us that reacts from fear, ego, and competition, and the part that responds with love, presence, and offering. One is the emotional brain, stuck in survival. The other is the conscious brain, aligned with contribution. And every day, we choose which one of those inner characters we feed. As you move through the biblical stories, through Noah and the flood, through Abraham and the promise, through Joseph's dreams and David's courage, you begin to see a pattern, not of external heroes, but of internal transformations. You begin to recognize these characters as fragments of yourself. Each one is a guide pointing you toward your own evolution. Noah doesn't just build an ark. He creates a structure in consciousness strong enough to survive the flood of emotions and unconscious programming that threaten to drown us. Abraham isn't just following God. He's walking away from the known, the familiar, the conditioned mind. He is the part of us that dares to trust the unknown, that believes in a vision no one else can see. Joseph isn't just interpreting dreams. He is the embodiment of intuitive wisdom, of staying connected to inner truth, even in the darkest of places. When we start to see these stories not as literal history, but as symbolic representations of our own psychology, something powerful happens. We stop reading them as something that happened. We start experiencing them as something that's happening right now within us, in our thoughts, our emotions, our habits, our struggles, our victories. You begin to understand that Goliath isn't an enemy out there. He's the limiting belief standing between you and your potential, that the wilderness isn't just a desert, it's the space of uncertainty where transformation takes place. That the promised land isn't a patch of earth, it's the elevated state of consciousness available to those who refuse to be ruled by the past. The story of Adam and Eve is one of the most well-known biblical narratives, yet its psychological significance is often overlooked. Most interpret it through the lens of morality or theology, but when we explore it as a metaphor for human consciousness, something profound emerges. This story marks not a fall from grace, but the birth of self-awareness. It is the moment when we transitioned from unconscious wholeness into conscious individuality, from instinct to intention, from survival to creation. In the garden, Adam and Eve exist in a state of unity, connected with nature, each other, and a higher intelligence. This is symbolic of the unconscious mind before the awakening of self. In this place, there is no judgment, no separation, no resistance. There is harmony, much like the coherent brainwave patterns found in deep meditation or flow states. It is the state before thought arises to divide experience into categories, before we know ourselves as separate from what is. The tree of knowledge of good and evil represents duality. The moment Eve eats the fruit and Adam follows, something radically transformative happens, the emergence of the thinking mind. This is the activation of the neocortex, the part of the brain that allows us to observe, reflect, analyze, and most importantly, choose. But with that choice comes consequence. Awareness gives rise to the possibility of shame, guilt, fear, and separation. They become aware of their nakedness, of vulnerability, of the self as other. From a neuroscientific perspective, this moment is like the transition from delta brainwaves in early childhood, where we absorb without judgment, into higher frequency beta brainwaves associated with analytical thinking and survival-based focus. It's the dawn of personal identity. We begin to define ourselves not by connection to the whole, but through contrast, through lack, through comparison. In psychological terms, this marks the split from the unconscious collective to the emergence of the personal ego. We move from unity into individuality, and while this seems like a loss, it's actually a necessary step in evolution. Because without the ego, without the thinking mind, we cannot become conscious creators. We cannot make decisions based on vision rather than instinct. We cannot transcend the program unless we know we're in one. Being cast out of Eden is not punishment, it's transition. It's the movement from autopilot into agency, from paradise into process. This mirrors the human journey. We leave the security of unconscious familiarity to face the unknown. And in that unknown, we are forced to confront our thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. We develop language, culture, morality. But more importantly, we develop the power of self-observation. Adam and Eve symbolize this exact shift, the emergence of the internal observer. And once the observer awakens, everything changes. Life is no longer happening to us, it is being shaped through us. The moment we become aware of our thoughts, we can change them. The moment we recognize that emotions are states of being, we can elevate them. And the moment we stop reacting to the outer world and start responding from within, we move from survival to creation. Survival is rooted in repetition, in the animal brain, in the loop of past experiences and predictable futures. Creation requires presence, elevated emotion, and the ability to think greater than we feel. Adam and Eve's story is our origin point. It is the birth of this potential. It's the moment we became capable of rewiring our brains, reconditioning our bodies, and redefining our lives, not because we were cast out, but because we became conscious of where we are. The serpent in the story is often vilified, but symbolically it represents desire, the urge to know more, to explore, to expand beyond limitation. It's the same drive that pushes us to evolve, to innovate, to imagine a life beyond what is. The serpent awakens curiosity, and curiosity is the first step to awareness. Without it, there is no journey. Without it, there is no transformation. What happens after Eden is not regression, it's activation. It's when the real work begins, the inner work. We are no longer simply being, we are becoming. The trials, the labor, the learning, all of it mirrors the struggle to integrate our higher faculties with our primal nature. To master the mind instead of being mastered by it. To step out of the program and into possibility. To stop living by memory and start living by vision. The story of the Exodus is not just a tale of liberation from physical slavery. It is a powerful metaphor for the journey of personal transformation. Egypt, in this context, is not merely a place on a map. It is a psychological state. It represents the familiar emotions, the conditioned thought patterns, the limiting beliefs that keep us enslaved to the past. Pharaoh is not just a historical figure, he is the inner tyrant, the survival mind, that resists change, that clings to what is known, even when the known is suffering. To leave Egypt is to leave behind the addiction to familiar emotions like guilt, shame, anger, and fear. Emotions that may not feel good, but feel normal. The body, conditioned by years of repetition, memorizes these emotions until they become part of our identity. We wake up and feel the same. We think the same thoughts. We predict the same outcomes, and in doing so, we recreate the same life over and over again. Egypt becomes the emotional territory we inhabit, safe, predictable, but stagnant. When Moses appears in the story, he does not just come to free a people. He comes to awaken a consciousness. He is the voice inside each of us that says, "You were not made to live in bondage to your past. There is more for you than this." Moses represents intention. Vision, the emerging leader within us who dares to challenge the inertia of our old selves. But breaking free is not instant. Pharaoh resists, and so do we. Every time we try to change, the body resists. It craves the chemical cocktail of stress, of self-doubt, of emotional addiction. Pharaoh, like the subconscious mind, tightens his grip when freedom is near. The 10 plagues are symbolic of the internal chaos that arises when we challenge our programming. When we try to recondition the body fights back. It's the discomfort of withdrawal from emotional habits that no longer serve us. Even after the Israelites leave Egypt, the story tells us they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Why? Because while it's easy to take the body out of Egypt, it's far more difficult to take Egypt out of the body. The wilderness is the in-between space, the gap between the old self and the new. It is the space where we are no longer who we were, but not yet who we are becoming. This is the void, the unknown, where transformation truly occurs. In this psychological wilderness, we face our doubts. We confront the remnants of our conditioning. The Israelites grumble, they fear, they even long to return to slavery because at least it was familiar. And this is exactly what the brain does when we begin to rewire it. It defaults back to the predictable. It resists uncertainty. The wilderness represents that space where we must hold a vision of the promised land, even when our external reality hasn't changed yet. Neuroscience tells us that change requires us to think greater than how we feel, that we must install new neural pathways, new beliefs, and new emotional signatures into the body through repetition and elevated awareness. The journey out of Egypt is the process of neurological and emotional unlearning. We begin to dismantle the circuits of the old self, the self based on the past, the trauma, the stories we've told ourselves, and we begin to embody a future identity based on intention, coherence, and possibility. The parting of the Red Sea is the emotional breakthrough. It's the moment we cross the threshold, from survival to creation. The sea, which once represented chaos and fear, is divided by the power of aligned thought and belief. It is the energy of unwavering intention that opens a path where none seem to exist, and when we commit fully, when we burn the bridge to the old emotional self, there is no going back. But the journey doesn't end there. Because arriving at the promised land is not a location, it's a level of consciousness. It's a vibrational shift. It's a body that has learned to live in elevated emotion, in gratitude, in freedom, in creation, rather than in reaction. The Exodus, then, is not just history. It is a mirror. It reflects the process of emotional emancipation, the willingness to leave behind the identity that was built for survival, and to step into a life designed for expansion. Faith is often misunderstood. Many believe it is blind trust, an emotional crutch, or a leap into the unknown without evidence. But when we explore the deeper psychological and biological dimensions of faith, something extraordinary is revealed. Faith is a neurological act. It is the cognitive ability to emotionally and mentally inhabit a future reality before it has physically materialized. And this, at its core, is the mechanism of change. Faith is not passive. It is active, creative, and measurable. In the language of neuroscience, it is the deliberate reshaping of neural networks to reflect a future identity, rather than one anchored to the past. This is the very essence of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, adapt, and rewire itself in response to new thoughts, emotions, and experiences. For most people, reality is shaped from the outside in. Circumstances dictate mood, and emotions are the result of external conditions. This is the survival paradigm, but faith inverts that model. Faith asks us to think from the inside out, to align our thoughts and feelings with a vision of the future, and to make that internal state more real than our current environment. When we do this consistently, the brain begins to fire in new ways. New neural circuits are formed. Old ones are pruned away. We stop living as the record of the past and begin living as a map of the future. In biblical narratives, faith is the thread that carries the characters through the impossible. Abraham leaves his homeland based on a promise, not a guarantee. He walks not by sight, but by conviction. In neurological terms, he is wiring his brain for a future he has not yet experienced. He is activating the frontal lobe, the seat of imagination, foresight, and intentionality, while quieting the limbic system's demand for certainty and safety. This is the biology of faith. It is not wishful thinking. It is deliberate neurological conditioning. The same process is seen in the story of the woman who touches the hem of Christ's garment, believing she will be healed. She has rehearsed this outcome in her mind. She has embodied the emotional state of wholeness before the healing occurs, and that coherent energy between thought and emotion becomes the signal that draws a new experience to her. She does not hope. She knows, and that knowing creates a biological shift. When we experience elevated emotions like gratitude, love, inspiration, or trust, we move into heart coherence. The electromagnetic field of the heart becomes organized, sending a clear signal to the brain. The brain, in turn, becomes coherent, allowing new levels of insight, creativity, and resilience. This is when the body stops living in the past and begins to feel the future. And the more we rehearse this inner state, the more familiar it becomes. The more familiar it becomes, the more it defines who we are. This is how belief is installed into the nervous system. This is how faith becomes biology. Repeated thoughts, combined with strong emotion, create long-term potentiation. Essentially, the strengthening of synaptic connections. The stronger the emotion, the more the brain believes the experience is real. The subconscious doesn't differentiate between a real event and one vividly imagined. So when you emotionally embrace a future experience with the same intensity as a past trauma, your brain and body begin to change. They stop living in the memory of pain and start living in the chemistry of possibility. This is why belief must be felt, not just thought. Thinking a new thought without the emotional energy to support it is like planting a seed on concrete. But when thought is infused with emotion, it becomes a creative force. This is why the Bible says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." It is substance, synergy, information, intention, woven into the fabric of the brain and body, even before physical evidence appears. When we hold a vision with clarity and conviction, and we feel its reality before it happens, we are engaging in the same process that the greatest innovators, healers, and spiritual leaders throughout history have practiced. This is not mysticism, this is measurable, this is neuroplasticity at work. The brain begins to mirror the mind of the future rather than the experiences of the past. The body begins to anticipate the elevated emotion of what's coming rather than react to the familiar chemicals of what's been. The subconscious begins to surrender the old identity and adopt a new one aligned with intention, vision, and elevated emotional energy. Death and proved the eternal nature of life. But on a deeper psychological level, the resurrection is not just about a man rising from the grave. It is about a consciousness awakening within each of us. It is a metaphor for inner transformation, for the death of the old self and the birth of a new, elevated identity. The Christ within is not a figure outside of you. It is the dormant potential that exists in the deepest layers of your being, waiting to be awakened by awareness, intention, and elevated emotion. Before there can be a resurrection, there must be a crucifixion. And this crucifixion is symbolic of the breakdown of the conditioned self, the identity that has been constructed through repetition, trauma, past experiences, and survival-based emotions. This version of the self is rooted in fear, shame, guilt, doubt, and attachment to the known. It clings to what is familiar, even when it causes pain, because it believes that safety lies in predictability. The ego, the personality, the emotional programs wired into the brain and body. This is the self that must die. Crucifixion, then, is the process of letting go, not in theory but in practice. It is the neurological and emotional unraveling of the old personality. It is the body, addicted to survival-based chemicals, being forced to surrender control. It is the mind, addicted to familiar thoughts and patterns, being asked to step into the unknown. And this unknown is the tomb, the space between who we were and who we are becoming. It is the void, the darkness, the silence where nothing familiar exists, but where all things are possible. Psychological death is the prerequisite to transformation. In neuroscience, this is the moment when the brain begins to prune away old synaptic connections. It is when the energy of consciousness is no longer invested in the circuitry of the past. And as the old networks dissolve, the brain becomes a blank canvas, ready to be rewired. The tomb is not a place of punishment. It is a place of potential. It is where identity becomes fluid, where the limited self dissolves and something greater begins to emerge. The resurrection is this emergence. It is not merely about being alive again. It is about being alive in a completely different way. The resurrected self is not bound by the stories, emotions, and limitations of the past. It is a self born from presence, coherence, and clarity. It is a self that no longer reacts from memory, but responds from vision. This is what it means to rise in consciousness, to awaken the Christ within. The Christ within is a state of being. It is the expression of unconditional love, pure awareness, forgiveness, compassion, and divine intelligence. It is the aspect of you that is not defined by your past or environment. It is the eternal observer, the creator, the healer, the visionary. When this part of you becomes the dominant force in your life, you begin to live from the inside out. You begin to embody a higher order of consciousness. In physiological terms, this shift is measurable. Brain coherence increases. Heart rate variability becomes harmonious. Stress hormones diminish, while regenerative chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine increase. The body begins to mirror the mind of the elevated self. Cells receive a new chemical signature. Genes begin to express in new ways. You are no longer living in survival. You are creating from wholeness. This is the resurrection. It is not reserved for saints or sages. It is available to anyone willing to do the inner work, to enter the tomb of stillness and silence, to release the identity that was forged through pain, repetition, and reaction, and to emerge as something entirely new, not improved, but transformed, not modified, but reborn. This rebirth is not a concept. It is an experience encoded in your biology, your brain, your heart, and your field of energy. The Christ within is the coherent, connected, conscious version of yourself that already exists beyond the veil of the conditioned mind. When ancient scriptures speak of the kingdom of heaven, they are not merely pointing to a place in the clouds or an afterlife reward. They are referencing a state of consciousness, a level of mind where separation dissolves, where the inner world governs the outer, and where the individual recognizes their divine capacity to create reality from within. The kingdom is not a destination to be reached after death. It is an elevated psychological and emotional state, available now, in this moment, to anyone who aligns with it. To understand this fully, we must begin with a fundamental truth. Our inner world creates our outer experience. This isn't a poetic metaphor, it's neuroscience. Every thought produces a chemical. Every emotion reinforces that thought. Over time, repeated thoughts and emotions wire the brain and condition the body to become the subconscious reflection of our past. We begin to live by the predictable programs of memorized emotional experiences. This is the antithesis of heaven. It is psychological bondage. We are no longer creating. We are merely reacting, surviving, repeating. But something miraculous happens when we step into the present moment with full awareness. The present moment is the doorway to the divine. It's the space where possibility lives. The brain, no longer obsessed with forecasting a future based on fear or reliving a past based on pain, becomes coherent. The body, no longer reacting to stress, begins to rest, regulate, and regenerate. And in that coherence, we begin to think and feel in alignment with a new vision. We begin to tune into a reality not yet visible, but already energetically present. This is the first act of creation. Not reacting to what is, but feeling what could be as if it already is. The kingdom of heaven begins here. It is not accessed through effort, status, or suffering. It is accessed through elevated emotion, deep awareness and intentional focus. Gratitude, love, joy, compassion, and inspiration. These are the emotional signatures of the kingdom. These elevated states of being shift our energetic field. They change the frequency we broadcast, which in turn influences the outcomes we attract. In biblical language, we are told, "The kingdom of God is within you." That is not allegory. It is biology. Within every human being is the latent potential to move from victim to creator, from reaction to intention. When we enter into a coherent state of mind and heart, we begin to think greater than our environment. And as we consistently embody this elevated internal state, we begin to collapse time, drawing future outcomes into the present moment through the law of resonance. This is not wishful thinking. It is grounded in the principles of quantum physics and neurobiology. The observer effect shows that conscious attention alters the field of possibilities. When you hold a clear intention of a future event and combine it with the elevated emotion of that future being real, your body begins to believe it's already happened. Your brain begins to map that reality neurologically, and your energy, no longer entangled with the past, becomes a magnetic field for synchronicities and new experiences. To become the creator means to take full responsibility for your internal state. It means no longer allowing external conditions to dictate your happiness or identity. It requires discipline of thought and emotional intelligence. It means practicing the future, rehearsing the vision of your ideal life in your mind's eye, until it feels as familiar as the past you've lived. This is the daily work, to wake up and become aware of who you no longer want to be, and consciously choose who you are becoming. Heaven, then, is coherence. It is harmony between thought and feeling, brain and heart, inner world and outer world. It is the experience of alignment, of connection, of peace, not because conditions are perfect, but because you are living in a state beyond circumstances. You are generating your reality, not reacting to it. You are tuned to possibility, not limited by memory. The kingdom is not found through searching outward. It is awakened by returning inward, by dwelling in the field of creation rather than the prison of familiarity. And the more time you spend in that internal state of wholeness, the more your outer world begins to reflect the order, beauty, and grace that already lives inside you. Because the kingdom of heaven is not just a belief. It is a frequency, a level of being, and a state of mind where true creation begins.